Before we dive into the story, drop a comment below and tell us where you're watching from. Enjoy the story. The ceiling fan at Willow Creek's police station had been spinning the same lazy circles for 23 years. Officer Tom Berkeley knew this because he had counted every rotation during the slow summer afternoons, waiting for retirement to finally arrive. 3 more weeks. That was all he had left. Tom was 62 years old, with gray hair that had surrendered to white at the temples and hands that still remembered every case file they had ever held. He had seen enough in this small town to fill a dozen lifetimes, yet nothing could have prepared him for what walked through that door on an ordinary Tuesday evening. The station was quiet. Deputy Harris was finishing paperwork. The desk sergeant was on a coffee break. Tom was reviewing his pension documents when the front door creaked open. 2 little girls stood in the doorway. They were twins, no older than 7, with tangled hair and dirt on their cheeks. One of them was pushing an old wheelbarrow, the kind farmers use for hay. Inside that wheelbarrow sat her sister, curled up like a wounded bird. Tom rose slowly from his chair. The girl pushing the wheelbarrow had fierce, determined eyes. The girl inside the wheelbarrow was pale, her small body trembling. But what made Tom's heart stop was the shape of her belly, swollen in a way that made no sense for a child her age. Something was terribly wrong. Tom approached them carefully, the way one approaches a frightened animal. He knelt down to meet their eyes. "Hey there, sweetheart," he said softly. "My name is Tom. What's your name?" The standing girl looked at her sister, then back at Tom. Her lip quivered. "I'm Ellie," she whispered. "This is Rosie. She's real sick, mister." Tom nodded gently. "I can see that, Ellie. You were very brave to bring her here. Can you tell me what happened?" Ellie's eyes filled with tears. Her small hands gripped the handles of the wheelbarrow so tight her knuckles turned white. The desk sergeant's pen stopped mid-sentence. Deputy Harris looked up from his paperwork. The ceiling fan kept spinning, but suddenly the air felt thick and heavy. Ellie opened her mouth, and the words that came out changed everything. Dad put something inside her. The pen in the sergeant's hand froze in the air. No one breathed. No one moved. Tom felt 30 years of experience crash over him like a cold wave. He had heard many things in this station, confessions and accusations, lies and desperate truths. But this, from the mouth of a 7-year-old girl, standing in the doorway with her dying sister in a wheelbarrow? This was different. Tom placed a gentle hand on Ellie's shoulder. "You're safe now, sweetheart. Both of you are safe." But even as he said the words, his mind was already racing. What had happened to these children? Where had they come from? And where in God's name was their father? The answers would come, but they would not be what anyone expected. What did Ellie really mean? What is wrong with little Rosie? And where is the man who calls himself their father? The truth is coming. But in Willow Creek, some truths take time to surface. The next few minutes moved like a fever dream. Tom barked orders with a calm he did not feel. Deputy Harris called for an ambulance. The desk sergeant rushed to get blankets and water. And through it all, little Ellie refused to let go of her sister's hand. "You're doing so good, sweetheart," Tom told her, kneeling beside the wheelbarrow. "Help is coming. Rosie is going to be okay." But even as he spoke, he could see the truth in Rosie's half-closed eyes. This child had been sick for a long time. Whatever was happening inside her small body, it had been building for weeks, maybe months. The ambulance arrived in 7 minutes, though. It felt like 7 hours. Paramedics lifted Rosie onto a stretcher with practiced care, their faces professionally neutral, but their eyes betraying concern. "I want to go with her," Ellie said, her voice breaking. Tom looked at the paramedics. They hesitated. "Please," Ellie whispered. "She's scared. Of strangers. She needs me." Tom made the decision. "Let her ride along. I'll follow in my car." The ambulance doors closed and the sirens cut through the quiet evening air of Willow Creek. Tom watched it disappear down Main Street before turning to Harris. Call Helen Pritchard. Tell her we need her at the hospital immediately. Helen Pritchard was the county's only social worker, a woman in her 50s with kind eyes and a backbone of steel. If anyone could help these children navigate what was coming, it was her. Tom drove to the hospital with his hands tight on the wheel. His mind kept replaying Ellie's words. Dad put something inside her. What did that mean? What had that man done? At the regional hospital, chaos awaited. Rosie had been rushed into examination. Ellie sat alone in the waiting room, looking impossibly small on the plastic chair. Tom sat beside her. Ellie, I need to ask you some questions. Is that okay? She nodded, clutching a tissue someone had given her. Where do you and Rosie live? Far away, in the woods. Do you know the address? She shook her head. Daddy never told us. He said it was our secret place. Tom's stomach tightened. And your mommy? Where is she? Ellie's eyes dropped to the floor. Mommy went to heaven a long time ago. Before Tom could respond, a doctor emerged from the examination room. She was tall, with sharp features and silver-streaked hair pulled back in a tight bun. Her name tag read, Dr. Vivian Cole. Officer. Berkeley? Tom stood. What can you tell me? Dr. Cole glanced at Ellie, then gestured for Tom to follow her a few steps away. She spoke in a low voice. The child has significant abdominal swelling. We're running tests now, but I need to be clear about something. She paused, choosing her words. Carefully. I don't believe this is what you might be thinking. Tom frowned. What do you mean? There are no signs of physical harm in the way you might suspect. No injuries consistent with violence. But something is very wrong with this child, and it didn't happen overnight. Tom let out a breath he didn't know he was holding. Then what is it? Dr. Cole shook her head. I need to complete the examination, but I wanted you to know this case may not be what it appears. She returned to the examination room, leaving Tom alone with his thoughts. Helen Pritchard arrived 20 minutes later, slightly out of breath. Tom briefed her quickly. We need to find out where these children came from, Helen said. Do we have any records, birth certificates, school enrollment? Tom had already checked. Nothing. I found traces of an attempted birth registration from 7 years ago, but it was never completed. These girls are ghosts in the system. Helen's face darkened. Someone tried to register them and gave up. Why? That was the question. Why would a parent start the process and then vanish? Dr. Cole emerged again, and this time her expression made Tom's blood run cold. It wasn't anger. It wasn't disgust. It was sorrow. Deep, profound sorrow. Officer Berkeley, Mrs. Pritchard, I need to speak with both of you. Now. What did the doctor find? What secret has been growing inside little Rosie? And why does Dr. Cole look like she's about to deliver the worst news of her career? Dr. Cole led them into a small consultation room and closed the door. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting harsh shadows across her tired face. What I'm about to tell you stays in this room until we have more information, she began. The child has a large abdominal mass, a tumor. It's been growing for months, possibly longer, without any medical intervention. Tom felt the ground shift beneath his feet. A tumor? Yes, it's serious and she'll need surgery as soon as possible. But here's what I need you to understand. Dr. Cole paused, her voice softening. There are no signs of intentional harm, no evidence of violence. This child has been sick for a very long time and no one sought help for her. Helen pressed a hand to her chest. She's been suffering all this time? What breaks my heart, Dr. Cole continued, is that Rosie never complained. Not once during the examination did she cry or ask for relief. Children who grow up in extreme neglect often normalize their pain. They don't know that suffering isn't supposed to be constant. The words hung in the air like smoke. Tom thought of Ellie's words at the station. Dad put something inside her. Now they made a terrible kind of sense. The father must have tried to treat Rosie himself, perhaps with home remedies or folk medicine. The little girl interpreted his failed attempts as him putting something in her sister. "We need to find the father," Tom said. "And we need to find out where these children have been living." An hour later, Tom led a small team down a winding dirt road on the outskirts of the county. Ellie had finally given them enough details to locate the property, a place locals called the Forgotten Land, where property taxes hadn't been paid in over a decade. The house appeared through the trees like a ghost. It was small, barely more than a cabin, with a sagging roof and windows covered in plastic sheets. There was no power line connected to the structure, no running water that Tom could see. The yard was overgrown, but a small path had been worn between the front door and a vegetable garden that looked carefully tended. Tom approached slowly, his hand resting on his holster out of habit, but something told him he wouldn't need it. "Sheriff's Department," he called out. "Anyone home?" Silence answered. He pushed open the front door. It wasn't locked. Inside, the house was dark but surprisingly organized. The floor had been swept recently. A small table held 2 plates and 2 cups, arranged neatly. On the walls, dozens of children's drawings had been taped up with care, bright colors depicting sunshine and flowers and 2 stick figures holding hands. Tom's flashlight moved across the room. In one corner, he found a small reading nook. A pile of worn picture books sat beside 2 tiny pillows. Someone had created this space with love, despite having almost nothing. Deputy Harris called from the back room. "Tom, you need to see this." Tom walked through a narrow hallway into what must have been the bedroom. A single mattress lay on the floor, covered with patched blankets. Beside it sat a wooden crate being used as a nightstand. On the crate was a notebook. Tom picked it up and opened it. The handwriting was shaky, almost childlike, filled with spelling errors and crossed-out words. But the content made his throat tighten, page after page of notes about Rosie's symptoms, descriptions of herbal remedies, prayers written in desperate, uneven letters. Whoever wrote this had been trying everything they knew to heal a sick child. But it was the last page that stopped Tom cold. A drawing, crude but unmistakable. 2 little girls running through a green field, healthy and happy. Beneath it, a single sentence. "Please, God, make my girls better." Harris appeared beside him. "There's something else, Tom." He held up a small cassette tape, the kind that hadn't been used in decades. A faded label was stuck to its surface, written in a woman's handwriting. "Mommy singing." Tom looked around the room one more time. At the drawings on the walls, at the carefully mended blankets, at the small garden outside the window. This wasn't the home of a monster. This was the home of someone who had been desperately, hopelessly trying to hold his family together, with nothing but love and fear. But where was he now? Who is this father that the world is so quick to judge? What drove him to hide his family from everyone? And what happened to the mother whose voice still lives on that old tape? Tom returned to the hospital as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting Willow Creek in shades of orange and purple. He carried the notebook and the cassette tape in an evidence bag, though something in his gut told him these weren't evidence of a crime. They were evidence of desperation. Dr. Cole was waiting for him in the hallway outside Rosie's room. "We have the full results," she said quietly. "I need you and Mrs. Pritchard in my office." Helen was already there when Tom arrived, sitting in a chair with her hands folded tightly in her lap. Dr. Cole closed the door and leaned against her desk. "The tumor is serious," she began. "It's been growing for at least 4 to 6 months, possibly longer. Without immediate surgery, Rosie's chances are slim. With surgery, she has a fighting chance, but there will likely be lasting effects on, her health." Tom nodded slowly. "What kind of surgery are we talking about?" "Complex, high risk, but our surgical team is prepared. We've scheduled it for tomorrow morning." Helen spoke up, her voice strained. "Doctor, how does something like this go unnoticed for so long? Wouldn't the child have been in terrible pain?" Dr. Cole's expression shifted to something Tom could only describe as heartbreak. "That's what haunts me most about this case," she said. During the entire examination, Rosie never once complained. Not about the poking, not about the prodding, not about anything. When I asked her if her tummy hurt, she just shrugged and said, "It always hurts a little." Helen covered her mouth with her hand. Children who grow up in environments of extreme hardship often learn to normalize suffering, Dr. Cole continued. They don't cry out because they don't know that constant pain isn't normal. Rosie has been silently enduring this for months. She simply accepted it as part of life. The room fell silent. Tom thought about the notebook he had found, the prayers, the desperate remedies. Whoever had written those pages truly believed they were helping. "Doctor," Tom said, slowly, "is there any evidence that someone intentionally harmed this child?" Dr. Cole shook her head firmly. "None. No signs of physical mistreatment. No indicators of deliberate injury. What we're looking at is severe medical neglect, not intentional abuse. Someone failed to get this child proper care, but I don't believe anyone set out to hurt her." Helen let out a long breath. "That changes things legally, but it doesn't change the tragedy." "No," Dr. Cole agreed. "It doesn't." Tom pulled out the notebook and set it on the desk. "We found this at the house where the children were living. I think you should see it." Dr. Cole opened the notebook and began reading. Her eyes moved across the shaky handwriting, the lists of herbs and home remedies, the prayers scrawled in margins. When she reached the drawing of the two healthy girls running through a field, she had to stop. "This man thought he was saving her," she whispered. "That's what I'm starting to believe," Tom said. Helen leaned forward. "But why? Why wouldn't he just bring her to a hospital? To a doctor? Anyone?" That was the question that had been circling Tom's mind since they found the house. A father who clearly loved his daughters. A home that was poor but filled with care. Why would someone choose to hide from the world rather than seek help? "Fear," Tom said quietly. "I've seen it before. People who have been failed by the system so many times that they stop trusting it entirely. They'd rather suffer alone than risk losing everything." Dr. Cole closed the notebook gently. "Officer Berkeley, I've been practicing medicine for 30 years. I've seen neglect born from cruelty, and I've seen neglect born from ignorance and fear. This feels like the latter." She looked toward the window where the last light of day was fading. "If that little girl had arrived here 2 weeks later, there would have been nothing we could do. Whoever sent her to you saved her life." Tom thought of Ellie, 7 years old, pushing her dying sister in a wheelbarrow for miles. That little girl had done what her father couldn't. She had asked for help. Surgery awaits Rosie in the morning. But what about the man who tried so hard to save her on his own? Where is Derek? And what secrets is he still hiding? They found Derek the next morning. He was sitting in an abandoned church 3 miles outside of town, a crumbling structure that hadn't seen a congregation in decades. The roof had caved in on one side, and wildflowers grew through the broken floorboards. But Derek sat in the front pew, as if waiting for a sermon that would never come. Tom approached slowly, his boots crunching on fallen debris. "Deputy." Harris stayed near the door, hand on his holster. But Tom could already see that this man posed no threat. Derek was thin, almost gaunt, with hollow cheeks and hands that trembled constantly. His clothes were worn but clean, patched in several places with careful stitches. When he looked up at Tom, his eyes held no anger, no defiance, only exhaustion, and something that looked like relief. "Are you Derek?" Tom asked gently. The man nodded. "Are my girls okay?" "They're at the hospital. Rosie is getting the help she needs." Derek's face crumpled. He pressed his hands against his eyes and began to weep, his shoulders shaking with sobs that seemed to come from somewhere deep and broken. Tom sat down beside him on the worn wooden pew. He said nothing. Sometimes silence was the kindest thing you could offer. After a long moment, Derek spoke through his tears. "I tried so hard, I prayed. Night. I gave her the herbs, the teas, everything the book said would help. I thought God would heal her if I just believed hard enough. Why didn't you take her to a doctor, Derek? The question hung in the dusty air. Derek's hands fell to his lap. He stared at them as if they belonged to someone else. Because they would take them away, he whispered. The moment I walked into that hospital, they would see how we live. They would see that I can't read proper, that I don't have a job, that I got nothing to offer, and they would take my girls. His voice cracked. I grew up in the system. Officer, I know what happens to kids like mine. I spent my whole childhood being moved from home to home, never belonging nowhere. Some of those places were bad, real bad. Tom listened without interrupting. When Jolene got sick, she made me promise. She grabbed my hand and she said, Derek, don't ever let them take our babies. Promise me. And I promised her. I promised her I would keep them safe. Derek began to rock slightly, a self-soothing motion that Tom had seen in trauma survivors before. I thought I was protecting them. I thought if I just kept us hidden, kept us together, everything would be okay. But Rosie kept getting sicker and I didn't know what to do. I didn't know. He tried to hum something then, a melody that Tom vaguely recognized as a lullaby. But Derek's voice broke on the second note, and the song dissolved into sobs. I used to sing that to them every night, he managed. Their mama taught it to me, but I can't even remember the words no more. Tom felt something shift in his chest. He had walked into this church expecting to find a villain. Instead, he found a broken man who had loved his children the only way he knew how. It wasn't enough. It was never going to be enough, but it wasn't evil. Derek, Tom said quietly, I need to take you to the station. You understand that, right? Derek nodded slowly. I know. I've been waiting for you. Waiting. After Ellie left with Rosie, I knew it was over. I knew she was going to find help, and I knew that meant I'd lose them. He wiped his face with a trembling hand. But I couldn't stop her. I couldn't watch Rosie suffer no more, even if it meant losing everything. He looked at Tom with red-rimmed eyes. I just wanted them to stay with me. I didn't know I was making it worse, I swear to. God, I didn't know. Tom helped Derek to his feet. The man offered no resistance as Harris secured his hands. As they walked out of the church into the morning light, Derek turned back one last time to look at the altar. Will you tell them I love them? He asked. Will you tell them they're daddy? Never meant to hurt nobody? Tom nodded. I'll tell them. Derek is in custody, but is he truly a criminal or a victim of circumstances beyond his control? And as Rosie fights for her life in surgery, a phone call is about to change everything. News traveled fast in Willow Creek. By noon, everyone with a television, a phone, or a neighbor with a loud voice knew about the two little girls who had appeared at the police station. By evening, the story had spread across the county like wildfire, growing wilder with each retelling. Tom sat at his desk, watching the chaos unfold. The local newspaper had already published an article with the headline, Father Arrested After Children Found in Desperate Condition. The facts were thin, but the outrage was thick. People filled in the gaps with their imaginations, and imagination was rarely kind. Deputy Harris showed Tom his phone. You need to see this. It was a Facebook group called Willow Creek Community Watch. Hundreds of comments poured in, each one angrier than the last. Lock him up and throw away the key. How could anyone do this to innocent children? I always knew something was wrong with that family. Someone should have reported them years ago. Tom scrolled through the comments, his jaw tightening. Half of these people had never even seen Derek or his daughters. They had never driven down that forgotten road at the edge of the county. They had never wondered about the family living in silence just miles from their comfortable homes. But now they were experts. Now they were judges. Helen Pritchard arrived at the station looking exhausted. She dropped into the chair across from Tom's desk and rubbed her temples. The state office is pressuring me to recommend immediate placement in foster care, she said. They want the girls transferred to a group facility until permanent arrangements can be made. Tom frowned. Already? We don't even know the full picture yet. That's what I told them. But the media attention is making everyone nervous. They want this handled quickly and cleanly. Quickly and cleanly, Tom repeated bitterly. Those girls have been through enough. The last thing they need is to be shipped off to strangers in some facility 3 counties away. Helen nodded. I agree. But I need a reason to delay, something concrete. Tom thought for a moment. What about family? Have we looked for relatives? I started a search this morning. The mother's records are incomplete, but I'm working on it. Before Tom could respond, his desk phone rang. He picked it up, expecting another reporter or concerned citizen. Instead, a trembling voice came through the line. Hello, is this the Willow Creek Police Department? Yes, ma'am. Officer Tom Berkeley speaking. My name is Margaret Ellis. I'm calling from Riverside, about 12 hours east of you. The woman paused, and Tom could hear her struggling to keep her composure. I saw the news this morning about the 2 little girls. Tom sat up straighter. Yes, ma'am? I think they might be my granddaughters. The words hit Tom like a wave. Your granddaughters? My daughter's name was Jolene. Jolene Ellis. She disappeared almost 8 years ago with a man named Derek. I've been searching for her ever since. I hired investigators. I filed missing persons reports, but she just vanished. Margaret's voice broke. I didn't even know she had children. I didn't know I had grandbabies out there somewhere. Not until I saw those 2 little faces on the news this morning. Tom grabbed a pen. Mrs. Ellis, I need you to stay calm. Can you tell me more about your daughter? For the next 20 minutes, Margaret poured out her story. Jolene had struggled for years with personal demons. When she met Derek, she seemed to find stability for a while. But then they both disappeared, cutting off all contact with family. I never stopped looking, Margaret said. I have boxes of letters I wrote to her, all returned unopened. I have receipts from private investigators who could never find a trace. I have spent 8 years wondering if my daughter was alive or dead. She began to cry softly. And now I find out she's gone, and I have 2 granddaughters I've never met. Please, officer, please let me see them. Tom closed his eyes. This case grew more complicated by the hour. But for the first time since those girls walked into his station, he felt something that might have been hope. Mrs. Ellis, he said gently, I think you should come to Willow Creek. A grandmother appears from the past, desperate to meet the family she never knew existed. But can she give Ellie and Rosie the home they've never had? Margaret Ellis arrived in Willow Creek 2 days later, having driven through the night with only coffee and determination to keep her going. She was 68 years old, with silver hair pinned back neatly and hands that still showed the strength of a woman who had worked hard all her life. Her eyes were tired but fierce, the eyes of someone who had spent years searching and was finally close to finding what she had lost. Tom met her at the station. Mrs. Ellis, he said, extending his hand. Thank you for coming. Margaret shook his hand firmly, but her gaze was already looking past him, searching. Where are they? Where are my granddaughters? Rosie is still in the hospital recovering from surgery. Ellie is with her. I can take you there, but first we need to talk. They sat in Tom's office, the same room where so many difficult conversations had taken place over the years. Margaret clutched a worn leather bag in her lap, her knuckles white against the handles. Tell me everything, she said. I need to know what happened to my daughter, what happened to those children. Tom told her what he could. He spoke carefully, choosing words that would inform without destroying. He told her about the house at the end of the forgotten road, about Derek's attempts to care for the girls alone, about Rosie's illness and Ellie's bravery. He did not tell her everything. Some details could wait. When he finished, Margaret sat in silence for a long moment. Then she reached into her bag and pulled out a thick photo album, its edges worn soft from years of handling. This is my daughter, she said, opening to the first page. Tom saw a young woman with bright eyes and a wide smile, standing in front of a birthday cake. Jolene at 16. Jolene at her high school graduation. Jolene holding a kitten she had rescued from a storm drain. She was so full of light when she was young, Margaret said softly. But life got hard for her. She made choices I didn't understand, fell in with people who didn't help her. When she met Derek, I thought maybe things would get better. She turned another page. But then they just disappeared. One day they were there, and the next they were gone. No note, no phone call, nothing. Margaret pulled out a stack of envelopes held together with a rubber band. These are the letters I wrote to her over the years. Every single one came back unopened. Return to sender. Address unknown. She laughed bitterly. I must have written 100. Letters to a daughter who never read a single word. Tom looked at the stack. It represented years of hope, years of reaching out into the void. I hired investigators, Margaret continued. Spent my savings trying to find them. But Derek knew how to stay hidden. He moved constantly, never stayed in. One place long enough to leave a trail. She closed the album and looked at Tom with wet eyes. I want you to understand something, Officer Berkeley. I never abandoned my daughter. And I never would have abandoned those children if I had known they existed. I have spent 8 years feeling like a failure because I couldn't find my own child. And now I learn that I have 2 granddaughters who have been living in poverty and fear, just a day's drive away. Her voice cracked. I could have helped them, if only I had known. Tom nodded slowly. I believe you, Mrs. Ellis, and I think those girls need someone like you right now. He drove her to the hospital himself. Ellie was sitting in the hallway outside Rosie's room, drawing pictures with crayons a nurse had given her. She looked up when she heard footsteps, her small body tensing with the wariness of a child who had learned not to trust strangers. Margaret stopped a few feet away, her hand pressed to her heart. Oh my goodness, she whispered. You look just like her. You look just like my Jolene. Ellie studied the old woman carefully. Who are you? Margaret knelt down slowly, bringing herself to the child's level. My name is, Margaret. I'm your grandmother. Your mommy was my little girl a long, long time ago. Ellie's eyes widened. Are you the grandma from heaven? The one mommy used to talk about? Margaret's tears spilled over. I'm not from heaven, sweetheart, but I've been looking for you for a very long time. A family begins to reconnect across years of silence and separation. But the road to healing is long, and some wounds run deeper than others. Tom drove home that evening with a weight on his chest that no amount of deep breathing could lift. Nancy was waiting for him on the porch, 2 cups of tea, already poured. After 40 years of marriage, she could read his face like a book. She said nothing as he sat down beside her, just handed him his cup and waited. The crickets sang their evening chorus. The stars began to appear, one by one. I can't stop thinking about him, Tom finally said. Derek? Nancy sipped her tea. The father? Everyone wants to call him a monster. The newspapers, the Facebook groups, even some of my own deputies. But I sat with that man in an abandoned church, Nancy. I watched him fall apart. He set down his cup, his hands unsteady. He tried to sing a lullaby, the one he used to sing to his daughters, but he couldn't remember the words. He just broke down crying. Nancy reached over and took his hand. This case reminds me of something, Tom continued quietly. Something I've never told you about. From my first year on the force. Nancy turned to, look at him. In 4 decades, there were few secrets between them, but she could see this one had been buried deep. There was a child, Tom said, a little boy. His family lived on the outskirts of town, kept to themselves. Neighbors said they were strange, unfriendly, so everyone left them alone. He paused, the memory rising like a tide. By the time someone finally called us, it was too late. That boy needed help months before anyone thought to check on him, and I've carried that with me ever since, the knowing that we all looked the other way. Nancy squeezed his hand. That wasn't your Fault Tom. Maybe not entirely, but it taught me something. Sometimes the people who need help the most are the ones who don't know how to ask for it. They sat in silence for a moment. Then Nancy spoke, her voice soft. I understand that feeling more than you know. Tom looked at her, surprised. I lost my younger sister when I was 17, Nancy said. She was struggling, but she hid it so well. We all thought she was fine. By the time we realized the truth, she was already gone. Tom stared at his wife. In 40 years, she had never spoken of this. Silence can feel like protection, Nancy continued, until it's too late. That's why I've never judged you for the cases that haunt you, Tom, because I know what it's like to wonder if you could have done more. Tom pulled her close, and they held each other as the night deepened around them. His phone buzzed. A message from Helen. Pritchard. Rosie is out of surgery. She's stable. She's going to make it. Tom closed his eyes and let out a breath he felt like he had been holding for days. She was going to make it. Rosie survives. But the journey to healing is just beginning, and when she finally opens her eyes, her first words will surprise everyone. 2 days after Rosie's surgery, Tom and Helen returned to the house at the end of the forgotten road. The morning mist still clung to the trees as they walked up the overgrown path. Tom needed to collect the remaining evidence. But more than that, he needed to understand. He needed to see the life these children had lived through their father's eyes. Helen walked beside him in silence, her face thoughtful. Inside, the house felt different in the daylight. Sunbeams filtered through the plastic-covered windows, illuminating dust particles that floated like tiny stars. Tom moved slowly through the rooms, seeing details he had missed before. In the corner of the main room, someone had built a small shelf from scrap wood. On it sat a collection of pine cones, arranged by size. Beside them, a jar of colorful buttons and a bird's nest, carefully preserved. He was teaching them, Helen said softly, in his own way. Tom nodded. He noticed the toys scattered near the reading nook, all handmade. A doll sewn from old socks, a wooden horse carved with a pocket knife, a set of building blocks cut from fallen branches. These were not the possessions of a cruel man. These were the gifts of a father who had nothing but time and love to give. Tom picked up Derek's notebook again. He had read it before, but now he studied it more carefully. The early pages contained simple notes: Rosie's temperature, what she ate, how much she slept. As the entries continued, the desperation grew. The handwriting became shakier. The remedies became more frantic. Chamomile tea for fever, honey and garlic for strength. Prayers written in the margins, some of them repeated dozens of times. Then Tom found a page he had not noticed before. It was a drawing, done in colored pencil. 2 little girls running through a field of green grass under a bright yellow sun. They were smiling, healthy, free. Beneath the drawing, in Derek's unsteady handwriting, "This is how they will be when God makes Rosie better, I believe. I have to believe." Tom's throat tightened. This man had not been hiding from responsibility. He had been clinging to hope with both hands, even as it slipped through his fingers. Helen appeared beside him, holding something small. "I found this tucked under the mattress." It was a photograph, creased and faded. A young woman holding 2 newborn babies, one in each arm. She was thin and tired, but her smile was radiant. On the back, written in a different hand, "Jolene with Ellie and Rosie, day 1. He kept this close to him," Helen said, "every night." Tom looked around the room one last time, at the handmade toys, at the careful drawings, at the desperate prayers of a man who loved his family more than he knew how to save them. This wasn't a house of cruelty, Tom said quietly. This was a house of fear and love, all tangled together. The pieces of Derek's story continue to fall into place. But what promise did he make to Jolene? And why did it lead him down such a desperate path? Margaret sat with Tom in the hospital cafeteria, 2 untouched cups of coffee growing cold between them. She had spent the last 2 days by her granddaughter's side, learning their faces, their voices, their small habits. Ellie liked to draw. Rosie hummed in her sleep. Neither of them had ever tasted ice cream until a nurse brought some as a treat. But now Margaret needed to fill in the gaps. She needed to understand what had happened to her daughter. "Tell me about Jolene," Tom said gently. "Everything you remember." Margaret took a deep breath. Jolene was a bright child, creative, curious, full of dreams, but she struggled too. Life felt heavy to her in ways I didn't understand when she was young. She traced the rim of her coffee cup with one finger. When she was 19, she started having problems. She made choices that pulled her away from the family. We tried to help, but she pushed us away. Then she met Derek. What was he like back then? Quiet, damaged. But he looked at her like she was the most precious thing in the world. Margaret smiled sadly. I think they recognized something in each other. Two broken people trying to build something whole. She pulled out the photograph Helen had found, the one of Jolene holding her newborn twins. I never saw this picture. I didn't even know she was pregnant. By the time the babies came, she had already disappeared. Tom leaned forward. Do you know why? Do you know? They ran? Margaret nodded slowly. I've pieced it together from what Derek told the police and what I knew about my daughter. Jolene was terrified of losing her children. She had a history that would have raised red flags with social services. She convinced herself that the moment anyone found out about her past, they would take the babies away. So they hid. They hid. And Derek, who had his own reasons to fear the system, went along with it. He loved her. He would have done anything for her. Tom thought about the notebook, the prayers, the desperate remedies. What happened to Jolene? Margaret's eyes filled with tears. Her health was never strong. She needed care that she refused to seek for the same reason she hid the children. She was afraid that asking for help would mean losing everything. She wiped her eyes with a trembling hand. She passed away the same way Rosie almost did, silently, without proper care, because she was too afraid to trust anyone. The weight of the story settled over them both. A mother who died in silence. A father who tried to keep a promise he didn't know how to keep. Two little girls caught in the middle of fear and love. Derek isn't, Derek? Evil, Margaret said quietly. He's broken. My daughter made him promise to protect those girls from a system that had failed them both. And he tried, in the only way he knew how. Tom looked at this woman who had lost her daughter and found her granddaughters in the same terrible week. What happens now? He asked. Margaret straightened in her chair, a new resolve in her eyes. Now I keep the promise my daughter should have asked me to keep. I take care of those girls, properly this time, with doctors and schools and a real home. The truth of the past finally comes to light. But as Derek faces judgment, will anyone speak for the broken man who loved too much and knew too little? The county courthouse had never seen so many people packed into its small gallery. Reporters jostled for position near the doors. Townspeople filled every seat, craning their necks for a glimpse of the man they had already condemned in their hearts. The air was thick with whispers and judgment. Derek sat at the defense table, looking smaller than Tom remembered. His public defender, a young woman named Grace Chen, sat beside him with a stack of files and a determined expression. The prosecutor, a sharp man in his 50s named Harold Vance, had made his intentions clear from the start. He wanted the maximum penalty for criminal negligence. He wanted to make an example. Tom was called to the stand. He placed his hand on the Bible, swore to tell the truth, and looked out at the sea of faces, waiting to hear what he would say. Vance approached first. Officer Berkeley, please describe the condition in which you found the children. Tom answered carefully, sticking to the facts. The swollen abdomen, the malnutrition, the isolation. And in your professional opinion, Vance pressed, was this child in immediate danger when she arrived at your station? Yes, Tom said. She was. Vance nodded with satisfaction and returned to his seat. Then it was Grace Chen's turn. Officer Berkeley, she began, In your 30 years of service, have you encountered cases of intentional cruelty toward children? I have. And in your assessment, does this case fit that pattern? Tom paused. The courtroom fell silent. No, he said firmly. It does not. A murmur rippled through the gallery. Vance frowned. Can you explain? Grace asked. Tom took a breath. As he spoke, images flashed. Through his mind, the reading nook with its worn picture books, the handmade toys, the notebook filled with prayers. I've seen what cruelty looks like, Tom said. I've seen homes where children are treated as burdens, as targets, as things to be broken. This was not that. He looked directly at Derek, who sat with his head bowed. This was a home built by a man who had nothing but love to give. He made mistakes, terrible mistakes, but he made them because he was afraid, not because he was cruel. The courtroom was utterly still. Derek grew up in a system that failed him, Tom continued. He watched the woman he loved die because she was too scared to ask for help. He tried to keep his family together the only way he knew how, and when his daughter got sick, he didn't have the knowledge or the resources to save her. But he tried. Tom's voice grew thick. He prayed every night. He made remedies from books he could barely read. He drew pictures of his daughters healthy and happy, because that was the only hope he had left. He paused. This man is not a monster. He's a father who loved his children and didn't know how to save them. The judge, an elderly man with decades of experience, studied Tom for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was measured. This court will take a brief recess. When we return, I will deliver my preliminary decision. The judge has heard the truth, but will justice see what Tom sees? Or will Derek be swallowed by the same system that broke him? The judge's decision came down like a quiet thunderclap. Derek would not face prison. Instead, he was ordered to undergo psychiatric evaluation and treatment at a specialized facility. The charge remained negligence, but the court recognized that punishment alone would not serve justice. Derek needed help, not a cell. Outside the courthouse, reactions were mixed. Some shouted in anger, demanding harsher consequences. Others nodded quietly, understanding that the story was more complicated than the headlines suggested. Tom watched Derek being led to the transport vehicle. Their eyes met. For a brief moment, and Derek mouthed two words. Thank you. Tom nodded once. It was all he could offer. In the weeks that followed, Willow Creek slowly returned to its usual rhythms. But for the people closest to the case, life was forever changed. Margaret filed for temporary guardianship. The paperwork was extensive, the interviews exhausting, but she approached each obstacle with the determination of a woman making up for lost time. She rented a small house on the edge of town, close enough to the hospital for Rosie's ongoing treatments, but far enough from the noise of Main Street to feel peaceful. She painted Ellie's room yellow, because Ellie said yellow was the color of happiness. Rosie remained in recovery, her small body slowly healing from the surgery. She would have lasting effects, the doctor said. Some things could not be undone, but she was alive and she was getting stronger every day. Ellie visited her sister every afternoon, bringing drawings and stories and updates about their new home. Grandma let me pick the curtains, she told Rosie one day. I picked the ones with butterflies, because you like butterflies. Rosie smiled weakly. Will I get to see them? Soon, Ellie promised. The doctor said soon. Margaret watched from the doorway, her heart breaking and healing at the same time. At home, the adjustment was not always easy. Ellie had spent her whole life in survival mode, always watching, always wary. She flinched at loud noises. She hoarded food under her pillow. She woke up in the middle of the night, checking to make sure Rosie was still breathing. Margaret learned to move slowly, speak softly, ask permission before touching. On the third night, Ellie couldn't sleep. The new bedroom felt too big, too quiet, too unfamiliar. She sat on the edge of her bed, hugging her knees, her eyes wide in the darkness. Margaret heard the soft sounds of distress and appeared in the doorway. "What's wrong, sweetheart?" Ellie shook her head, unable to find words. Margaret didn't push. Instead, she walked to the closet, pulled out a thick blanket, and spread it on the floor beside Ellie's bed. "Mind if I sleep here tonight?" she asked. Ellie stared at her grandmother. "On the floor?" "I've slept in worse places," Margaret said with a gentle smile. "Besides, new houses can feel scary. I think they feel less scary when someone's close by." She lay down on the blanket, pulling a pillow under her head. "I'll be right here until you fall asleep," she said. "And I'll be here when you wake up. Tomorrow, too. And the day after that." Ellie didn't respond, but after a few minutes her breathing slowed. Her grip on her knees loosened, and eventually she slept. Margaret stayed on that floor every night for 2 weeks. Meanwhile, the community of Willow Creek began to shift. The initial anger faded, replaced by something more complex. People started asking questions they should have asked years ago. A neighbor brought groceries to Margaret's door. The pharmacist donated Rosie's medications. The church organized a fundraiser for the family's medical expenses. It wasn't enough to erase the past, but it was a start. One afternoon, Tom stopped by to check on the family. He found Ellie in the backyard attempting to build a birdhouse from scrap wood. "Need some help?" he asked. Ellie looked up at him with serious eyes. "Do you know how to make one?" "I think I can figure it out." They worked together in comfortable silence, sawing and hammering and sanding. When the birdhouse was finished, Ellie held it up proudly. "This is for Rosie," she said, "for when she comes home so she can watch the birds from her window." Tom smiled. "I think she's going to love it." A new family takes shape, one careful step at a time. But Rosie still has questions, and the answer she seeks will test everyone's strength. 3 weeks. After the hearing, Tom received a phone call that made his heart sink. Derek had suffered a breakdown at the psychiatric facility. In a moment of overwhelming despair, he had tried to hurt himself. The staff intervened in time, but now he was under constant observation, considered a risk to his own safety. Tom hung up the phone and sat in silence for a long moment. He thought about the man he had met in that abandoned church, the trembling hands, the broken lullaby, the desperate love that had driven every terrible decision. The next morning, Tom drove to the facility. It was a plain building, on the outskirts of the next county, surrounded by chain-link fencing and carefully maintained lawns. Inside, the hallways smelled of antiseptic and something else, something that reminded Tom of resignation. A nurse led him to Derek's room. Derek sat on the edge of his bed, staring at the wall. He had lost weight since the hearing. His eyes were hollow, his shoulders hunched inward like a man trying to disappear. "You have a visitor," the nurse announced. Derek looked up slowly. When he saw Tom, confusion flickered across his face. "Officer Berkeley?" Tom entered the room and sat in the chair beside the bed. "I heard you were having a hard time, thought I'd come by." Derek shook his head. "Why? You got what you needed from me. The case is closed." "The case might be closed," Tom said quietly. "But I don't think your story is." Derek laughed bitterly. "My story ended the day Ellie pushed that wheelbarrow through your door. Everything since then is just waiting." "Waiting for what?" "For the guilt to stop." Derek's voice cracked. "But it never does. Every night I close my eyes and I see Rosie's face. I see how much pain she was in. And I know I did that. I did that to my own daughter. Because I was too scared and too stupid to ask for help." Tom let the words hang in the air before responding. "You made mistakes, Derek. Terrible ones. No one is going to tell you otherwise." He leaned forward. "But you also loved those girls more than anything in this world. That's not nothing." "Love wasn't enough," Derek whispered. "Love doesn't fix broken things." "No, it doesn't. But it can be the reason broken things get fixed." Tom reached into his jacket and pulled out a photograph. It was the picture of Ellie and Rosie that Margaret had given him permission to share. The girls were sitting on the porch of their new home, Ellie's arm around her sister, both of them almost smiling. Derek's hands shook as he took the photograph. "They're okay," he managed. "They're healing. Slowly, but they're healing. Rosie is getting stronger every day. Ellie is starting to trust people again. And they're with their grandmother now, someone who loves them and can take care of them properly." Tears streamed down Derek's face. He pressed the photograph to his chest like a lifeline. "I failed them," he said. "You did," Tom agreed. "But you also did something right. You let Ellie be brave. You didn't stop her when she decided to find help. And because of that, Rosie is alive." Derek looked up, his eyes searching Tom's face for truth. "That little girl pushed her sister through miles of woods and dirt roads to find a police station she didn't even know existed," Tom continued. "She did. That because somewhere inside her she believed that people could help. That courage didn't come from nowhere, Derek. It came from you." For a long moment, Derek said nothing. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, he asked, "Do you think they'll ever forgive me?" Tom considered the question. Carefully. "I don't know. That's not my answer to give, but I think the first step is forgiving yourself enough to become someone worth forgiving." Before Tom left, Derek made a request. "Could you give them something for me? I've been writing a letter, to both of them, just to say I'm sorry. To tell them I love them." He handed Tom a folded piece of paper, the handwriting shaky but careful. "I'll make sure they get it," Tom promised. Derek begins the long journey toward redemption. And as Rosie prepares to finally come home, a new chapter awaits the family that almost wasn't. Tom Berkeley had never considered himself a writer. In 30 years of police work, he had filled out thousands of reports, each one dry and factual, stripped of emotion. Just the facts, ma'am. That was how he had been trained. But now, sitting on his porch with Nancy's old typewriter in front of him, he found himself paralyzed. The keys waited, the blank page waited, and Tom couldn't bring himself to start. It had been Nancy's idea. "You've been carrying this story around like a stone in your chest," she had said the night before. "Maybe it's time to set it down. I'm not a writer, Nancy. I wouldn't know where to begin. Begin with the truth. That's all anyone needs." But now, facing the empty page, Tom wondered if the truth was enough. What if he told it wrong? What if his words made things worse instead of better? What if people read his account and still saw only a monster, not the broken man behind the headlines? He sat there for an hour, his fingers hovering over the keys, unable to type a single word. Nancy came out with 2 cups of coffee and sat beside him. She didn't push. She didn't offer advice. She just waited, the way she had waited through 30 years of difficult cases and sleepless nights. Finally, Tom spoke. "What if I make it worse?" "Worse how? What if I tell this story and people still don't understand? What if they use my words to hurt that family even more?" Nancy took a sip of her coffee, considering. "Tom, you've spent your whole career letting other people tell the stories. The reporters, the prosecutors, the Facebook commenters who never met Derek or those girls. You've stayed quiet because that's what officers are supposed to do." She set down her cup and looked at him with steady eyes. "But if you don't tell this story, someone else will tell it for you, and they'll tell it wrong." Tom stared at the typewriter. "These girls deserve better than the version the world has created," Nancy continued. "Derek deserves better. Even after everything. And maybe, just maybe, there are other families out there living in silence right now. Families who are too scared to ask for help. If your words reach even one of them, isn't that worth the risk?" Tom closed his eyes. He thought about the house at the end of the forgotten road, the handmade toys, the prayers in the notebook, the drawing of 2 healthy girls running through a green field. He thought about Ellie, 7 years old, pushing her sister through miles of wilderness because she believed someone would help. He thought about Derek in that psychiatric facility, clutching a photograph like it was the only thing keeping him alive. And he thought about all the people in Willow Creek who had driven past that forgotten road for years, never once stopping to wonder who lived at the end of it. Tom opened his eyes and began to type. The words came slowly at first, then faster. He wrote about poverty and fear. He wrote about systems that were designed to help but often pushed people further into the shadows. He wrote about a father who loved his daughters more than he knew how to save them. He wrote about silence and how it could feel like protection until it became a prison. He called the article, "What We Let Slip By." When he finished, it was past midnight. Nancy had fallen asleep in her chair beside him, a blanket pulled over her shoulders. Tom read through the pages one more time, then folded them carefully. The next morning, he drove to the regional newspaper office and handed the article to an editor he had known for 20 years. "I don't know if this is any good," Tom admitted. "I've never written anything like this before." The editor read the first page, then looked up with something unreadable in his eyes. "Leave it with me," he said. 3 days later, the article was published. Within a week, it had been shared across the state. Within 2 weeks, it had gone national. Tom's phone rang constantly, but he let most calls go to voicemail. He hadn't written the article for attention. He had written it because some truths were too important to stay silent. Tom's words reach further than he ever imagined. And as Rosie finally prepares to leave the hospital, the ripples of one small article begin to change Willow Creek forever. 3 months had passed since 2 little girls walked into a police station and changed everything. Willow Creek was not the same town it had been. Tom's article had sparked something no one expected. Donations poured in from across the country. A mobile health clinic now traveled the rural roads, reaching families who had been invisible for too long. Churches and community centers opened their doors wider, asking questions they should have asked years ago. The silence was finally breaking. On a crisp autumn morning, Margaret drove to the hospital for the last time. Rosie was coming home. Ellie had been preparing for days. She hung the butterfly curtains in Rosie's room. She placed the birdhouse on the windowsill, positioned perfectly to catch the morning light. She picked wildflowers from the backyard and arranged them in a mason jar by the bed. When Margaret's car pulled into the driveway, Ellie was waiting on the porch, holding a single yellow balloon. The car door opened. Margaret stepped out first, then turned to help Rosie. The little girl was thin and pale, but her eyes were bright. She walked slowly, carefully, holding her grandmother's hand. When she saw her sister, a smile spread across her face. Ellie ran to them. The 3 embraced on the front lawn, grandmother and granddaughters tangled together in a knot of arms and tears and laughter. Tom and Nancy watched from across the street, standing beside their truck. Nancy slipped her hand into Tom's and squeezed. "You did good, Tom," she said softly. Tom shook his head. "Ellie did good. That little girl saved her sister's life." They watched as Margaret led the twins inside their new home. Through the window, Tom could see Ellie showing Rosie around, pointing to the butterfly curtains, the birdhouse, the flowers. Rosie stopped in front of the window and looked out at the yard. Her voice was faint but clear. "Grandma, are we going to stay here forever?" Before Margaret could answer, Ellie spoke. "Even if we don't," she said quietly, "now we know where to come back to." Margaret pulled both girls close, tears streaming down her weathered cheeks. Tom turned away, giving the family their privacy. As he and Nancy walked back to their truck, he thought about everything that had led to this moment. The fear, the silence, the failures of people and systems alike, but also the courage, the love, the second chances. Willow Creek would never forget what happened, but maybe finally it had learned to listen. Not all silence is cruelty. Sometimes it is just the sound of pain from those who have lost even the courage to ask for help, but all pain has an echo if someone chooses to hear it. The end.